Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashley Weinheimer. I'm a customer success librarian for McGraw-Hill's AccessScience platform, which is the sponsor for today's presentation on low impact hydropower with Shannon Ames, Maryalice Fischer, and Whitman Constantineau of the Low Impact Hydropower Institute, or LIHI. So first, just a brief word on AccessScience, which is an authoritative, dynamic online resource that contains high-quality reference material covering all major scientific disciplines. An award-winning gateway to scientific knowledge, it offers over 10,000 in-depth articles on scientific concepts, briefings and news stories on the latest scientific developments, plus biographies, videos, and exclusive animations. All of the articles on Access Science are written by expert scientists and engineers, including our guest speakers today, who co-authored our article on water power. That article is currently available as an open access article on the site, so you can head over and check that out. And if you would like more information on Access Science, you can contact customer success at the email listed on the screen. And that email and the link to the water power article will be included in the follow-up email that you'll receive as well. Just a few housekeeping things. The webinar is being recorded, so everyone who registered will receive a link to view that recording, as well as some additional information, as I mentioned. All of our attendee lines are muted, but you do have the option to use chat or Q&A to communicate with me and our speakers. So please use the Q&A option for any official questions that you'd like me to pass along for our Q&A portion, and feel free to use the chat box to add any other comments that you'd like to share. Some of my McGraw-Hill colleagues and I will be monitoring both of those, so you can enter your questions and comments throughout the discussion. And now I am thrilled to introduce our guest speakers, starting with Shannon Ames, who has been LIHI's executive director since 2016. She is responsible for strategic direction, oversight of administrative responsibilities, and the continued success of LIHI's and its certification program. Prior to joining, Shannon worked as the director of stakeholder and government relations for Brookfield Renewable Energy Group and as the environmental director for the Senate co-chair of the Massachusetts Environment and Natural Resources Committee. Shannon has worked on environmental and energy legislation at the state and national level and has experience in project management, small business ownership, and nonprofit management, including currently serving as board president of the Mystic River Watershed Association. Shannon has a BA from Colby College and an MBA in Public and Nonprofit Management from Boston University. Next up is Maryalice Fischer, LIHI's Certification Program Director, who is responsible for managing the Low Impact Hydropower Certification application process and monitoring compliance of all certified projects across the U.S. Prior to joining LIHI in 2017, she worked as an environmental consultant for 12 years, serving the energy industry, and for 18 years prior to that, within the electric utility industry, conducting research and developing programs for energy conservation and demand-side management, as the environmental and safety engineer for a transmission and distribution company, and as the environmental manager for a hydro and wind power generation company. She holds a Master of Science degree in Environmental Studies from the University of Massachusetts Lowell and a Bachelor of Science degree in Applied Mathematics and Physics from the University of New Hampshire. And lastly, we have Whitman Constantineau, who joined LIHI as a program coordinator in March of 2019. He is responsible for the daily operations and assists the certification program director in administering the Low Impact Certification Program. He also manages the LIHI website, interfaces with stakeholders and certificate holders, and supports the Institute's outreach and education efforts. Prior to his current position, Whitman worked for the University of New Hampshire's Sustainability Institute. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Conservation and Sustainability from the University of New Hampshire. So thank you so much to our speakers for being with us today. And now I'll hand it over to Shannon to start off the presentation.
Thank you, Ashley. It's really great to be here today. We appreciate being invited. We look forward to sharing with you. So what we'll do is just talk a little bit about the LIHI program and how we got started and what we do. And then Whit will take us through a little bit more about how hydropower works, kind of the ins and outs. And Maryalice will walk us through some examples, talk about the market, and we'll follow up. I'll follow up and close. And Whit is driving our slides. So next. Thank you. So what is LIHI? We are a national nonprofit organization. So we're a 501c3 organization. We have three main purposes. One is to define what low impact means. And the next one is to conduct a certification program. So to identify and recognize hydropower programs that meet that definition. And then thirdly is to educate the general public on hydropower impacts. We have three main guiding principles. One is that we make sure that our criteria and our standards are science-based. Secondly, we interact with independent reviewers who conduct the primary review when we get applications, and that's to ensure that it's independent. And then thirdly, we prioritize conservation groups and their voices. Half of our governing board is made up of conservation interests, and they play a key role in the application review process. Next. So right now we have 169 active certificates. Within that, there are 283 individual facilities that are certified. These facilities span 96 rivers in 23 states, and together they represent 4 gigawatts of electricity capacity and 16,000 gigawatt hours of electricity production annually. The facilities range from very small, so 10 kilowatts, about 0.1 of a megawatt, all the way up to 690 megawatts in capacity. The number of certificates is really driven by renewable energy credit programs and whether they recognize LIHI certification. And you can see by the map that Massachusetts has a robust renewable energy credit market and program, and they do require LIHI certification, or I should say LIHI certification serves as a proxy to meeting the Massachusetts environmental standards for hydropower. So that has driven certification throughout the Northeast. And then also in the Northwest, the state of Oregon recognizes LIHI certification. And then across the country, those certifications are driven partially by the Green E voluntary renewable energy credit market, as well as the EPA's Green Power Partnership Program. And increasingly, we do see just interest in terms of large off-takers that are interested in contracting directly with hydropower operations and wanting to ensure that the hydropower they're contracting with is low impact. Next. So what do? We hope that what we're doing is providing confidence. And we do that by being 100% voluntary, although it is required by various policies. It is not required by us. It is not a regulatory regime. You do not need LIHI certification in order to operate. So it is 100% voluntary. And again, as I said before, our reviews are independent and they're based on vetted criteria. Transparency is very important to us and to the program. We include public comment periods twice during the review process and take public input and concerns throughout a certificate life. There is annual accountability for the certified facilities, and we have regular renewals every 5 to 10 years. We hope we provide incentives for stronger stewardship. One way is through our Plus standard, where you can earn extra years on your certificate, and also through conditions. A large number of our certified facilities do have conditions on their certificates, and those conditions require either improvements to facilities or operations, and sometimes better communication with stakeholders. I should say that not all hydropower is attainable. I mean, not all hydropower can attain LIHI certification. Right now, 11% of hydropower in the United States is certified. That doesn't necessarily mean that all hydro that's not certified can't be certified. A number of facilities probably could, but haven't come forth and applied. But about 20% of the inquiries and initial applications that we receive do not make it to certification. So there is a significant percentage that would need to improve operations or facilities in order to meet our standards and criteria. Next. Thank you. So a quick something about our criteria. First of all, as I said before, they are developed through extensive public process. Transparency is important not only in the application process, but in the creation of our criteria. And we do renew them or review them annually to ensure that they are still meaningful and based on the most up-to-date information. So our criteria, there are 8 of them. We look at river flows. So we look at the amount of water that's coming either through a hydropower facility or through, around, or over a dam associated with that facility to ensure that the flows in the river are adequate for the ecosystem. Secondly, we look at water quality. So the change in the flows, taking water out of a system, putting it back in, can all change the quality of water. And so we ensure that through the operations that the quality of the water is still adequate and sufficient for the life that's in the river and the ecosystem. We also look at whether there are migratory species at the facility and whether, if there are, whether they can safely and effectively pass upstream past any dams or barriers, or downstream, again, past any dams or barriers. And we look to make sure that there aren't significant numbers of fish accidentally being pushed through a hydropower facility and endangering them. We also look at shoreline protection. So hydropower operations can impact reservoirs and the height of those reservoirs, as well as flows. And we make sure that those operations are not negatively impacting the shorelines around the facilities. We look at threatened and endangered species. We look at what kind of endangered or threatened species there are at or around the facility. And if there are any, we ensure that adequate protections are being taken so that no harm comes to those species. We also look at cultural and historic resources. That can be, whether the powerhouse itself is eligible for national listing, or we also look at whether there are indigenous artifacts that are located at a facility and if there are, certainly that they are adequately protected and cared for. And then finally, we look at recreation. We want to ensure that the public has free access to the river so that everybody can enjoy the resources of those rivers. We do, however, respect safety. It is very unsafe to be near a dam, just below a dam, or in what we call the tail race of a hydropower facility. So we respect safety around those areas, but otherwise expect that there will be free and adequate access to the recreation. We also look to see whether the hydropower owners have provided any enhancements, campsites, picnic grounds, fishing piers, etc. Next. So the final thing that I'll say is that LIHI has specific goals and outcomes that we're looking at when we evaluate each of our criteria. And those are what is most important to us. We often get asked, what's the difference between LIHI certification and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission licensing, which the majority of hydropower facilities in the United States is licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And FERC is mandated to balance energy needs and environmental needs. So those are balanced and looked at equally. We, however, don't have to do that. So we concentrate on environment, and that is basically where we put our fingers on the scales. And that, plus our yearly accountability and our transparency, I think is what sets us different and apart. That, plus we're not required for a hydropower facility to operate. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Whitman, who will talk to us a little bit about the types of hydropower and other minutia.
Excellent. Thank you, Shannon. So we talked about low impact hydropower. We'll transition a little bit to hydropower more generally. There are two different types of facilities. There'll be conventional or conduit facilities. A conduit facility is not going to connect to a natural waterway. It's going to utilize a penstock or some sort of pipe to channel water flow from an existing water supply, like a drinking water reservoir, wastewater or irrigation system. It'll utilize water flow from those systems to generate power. In a conventional type facility, electricity is going to be generated utilizing a natural waterway, whether that be via a dam or diverted water flow from the river, that sort of thing. Within those facility types, hydropower operators have several options for operating regimes. The first of which, a run-of-river project, relatively simple in concept. It just means that the water coming into a project is going to be matched with the water coming out of a project. Inflow equals outflow. With little variation in water flow, the thought is that it'll minimize risk to the ecosystem that the facility relies on. That operating regime can be modified. So a project may implement periods of storage based on other water needs, or they could switch between operating modes based on seasonal conditions. So for example, a project could operate 8 or 9 months out of the year as a run-of-river project, but during irrigation system may transition to some sort of storage facility to support irrigation needs in their area. Run of release, very similar to run of river, but in some cases, water flow from a dam may not be controlled by the hydropower facility itself. So for example, if I owned or operated a hydropower facility, but the dam that I relied on for flows was owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, I wouldn't have control over the releases allocated to my facility. But I do have control over the releases from my facility. So rather than matching inflow and outflow from a natural waterway, I would be matching the outflow from my facility with the inflow allocated to me from the dam operator. A store and release project is kind of what we think of when we think of a conventional hydropower project. Those will be facilities that a dam creates a reservoir or an impoundment, and water is released through the hydropower facility as needed to support electricity demand. A peaking project will be one of those projects, an impoundment or reservoir project, that stores water until electricity demand is at its peak. At that point, water would then be released through the turbines, generating power to help match that peak load demand. And then a load following project is one that will adjust its power output throughout the day as electricity demand fluctuates. There are other types of hydropower, including marine hydrokinetic, which is a relatively new burgeoning field of hydropower generation that utilizes wave or tidal power to generate electricity. And then there's also pump storage hydropower projects, which are basically hydropower batteries. So two separate reservoirs will store water, an upper and a lower reservoir. Water will be stored in that upper reservoir until periods of electricity demand are high. So weekdays when everybody's turning on their coffee machines in the morning, or when they're coming home from work and starting dinner, that sort of thing. When electricity demand is high, water will be released from the upper reservoir, generating electricity and stored in the lower reservoir. Then when electricity demand and prices are low, late at night or on the weekends, the same turbines that were once generating power will be reversed sending water from the lower reservoir back up to the upper reservoir. It's a system that utilizes more energy to pump that water from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir, but it helps to mitigate peak electricity demand and supports the integration of other renewables. Our program does not certify marine hydrokinetic or pump storage hydropower facilities at this time. And here we have a diagram of a conventional impoundment project. So we have a dam, stretching bank to bank on a waterway. On the left there, you'll see where water is brought into the project via the intake. A trash rack is there to protect the project from, large detritus or deter aquatic biota from entering the facility. Water flows are controlled, aptly named, by the control gate, and water flows into the project via the penstock, bringing it to the turbine, spinning a magnet, generating electricity. That electricity is sent to a transformer, which steps up the voltage and prepares it for transmission to the grid via the transmission lines. All of that generating equipment is housed in the powerhouse, and water, as it exits the turbine, is sent back to the natural waterway via a draft tube. On the far bank there are two other structures. A spillway, which is it's a structure used to control the release of water not used for generation and to support downstream flow. And then the fish ladder on the farthest reach there allows for the passage of migratory species like Atlantic salmon or American eel to bypass the dam. And so as our energy grid transitions to a higher mix of renewables, especially intermittent ones, it's really important that hydropower is there to support those sources of energy that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. It helps to support solar and wind via baseload power, so power that can be generated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. So it helps the integration of those sources. It helps keep our grid reliable and stable, and can help mitigate seasonal highs and lows of generation capacity. So despite changes in weather patterns or changes in our climate, hydropower operators are able to use long-term averages of water flow and current weather data to predict operations and availability of generation. And so we'll transition into sort of a tour of some of the hydropower facilities in the LIHI certification program. The first of which is one of our earliest projects, LIHI certificate number 15. This is the Bauersock Mills hydropower facilities in Lawrence, Kansas. This is the second of their powerhouses on one bank of the river. It's a family-owned facility, currently in their third generation of ownership. And they started as a power source for a mill in the area and then was rebuilt as a standalone generation facility. This one is just under 5 megawatts in capacity. It's a conventional type facility, operates in run-of-river mode, so inflow matches outflow from the facility. And then on the opposite bank of the river is the original powerhouse, just under 2.5 megawatts, again, conventional facility, run-of-river mode. And it also serves as a municipal drinking water supply reservoir, which is created by a dam. And with that, I will pass things over to Maryalice to continue our tour.
All right, thank you, Whitman. I'll give a few examples of the broad range of LIHI certified projects that we have in our portfolio. This one, West Delaware Tunnel in New York, is a conduit facility like Whitman just described. The hydroturbine is inside a water supply pipe in a whole water system that sends drinking water to New York City in this case. It takes advantage of water that's already flowing through the system for drinking water purposes. And so there are virtually no environmental impacts from the hydro generation. We also have certified projects, conduit projects on irrigation systems out in the West, and even on a wastewater treatment plant in Boston Harbor on Deer Island. This next slide, please, Whitman. This is an interesting project, Black Bear Lake in Alaska. Black Bear Lake is a natural lake located in the Tongass National Forest. As a natural lake, there's no dam, but water is diverted from the lake through the above ground and the buried penstocks down to the powerhouse in the bottom right corner of the slide. The project takes advantage of the difference in elevation or head from the lake down to the powerhouse, which is about 1,500 feet in this case. And so it allows for electricity generation even on a small, low flow stream. And it has very few environmental impacts because of the height elevation. There are no migratory fish species there. Because it's a natural lake in a pristine environment, the water quality is good, and the hydropower project doesn't change that at all. The land surrounding that is all national forest, so it's already protected. And those are just some of the ways that this project was able to be certified. On the next slide, please. This is an interesting project, the North Umpqua project in Oregon. It's large, it's almost 200 megawatts, and it's made up of a system of multiple dams, canals to deliver water to 8 different powerhouses. It's located on the North Umpqua River, as well as 2 tributaries to the river. In this case, all the projects are owned by the same company. They're operated remotely in tandem so that inflow from the upstream-most plant then dictates flows coming into and out of the downstream plants. They can do this remotely, which helps them to optimize their generation and the amount of flow that's managed through the system, as well as the timing of that flow. While also in a coordinated fashion, they're managing the natural resources that they steward, including water quality, fish passage, land protection, and recreation, among other things. Next slide, please. So there are some ways where hydro owners can both improve their operations so that they can maximize their revenues, maximize generation, as well as take steps to protect or improve the environment at the same time. A lot of these types of upgrades can be accomplished without creating new environmental impacts and without worsening existing environmental conditions. So some of these, I'll give some examples in a minute, but incremental generation upgrades can include a new turbine or a refurbished turbine, replacing parts of the turbine, or rewinding a generator, or control upgrades. A lot of hydropower projects in the US are rather old, and so over time their mechanical equipment gets fatigued, needs replacing, refurbishing. So those are one way of doing upgrades. Another way to increase operational flexibility or availability can include in replacing capacitors that improve or increase voltage stability, installing variable speed turbines that allow for generation over a wider range of flows. So electricity can be generated at a lower flow or a higher flow than a standard turbine. Dredging, I'll talk about in a minute, and gate modifications as well. All of these things lead to optimizing the amount of water available for generation. So next slide, thank you, Whit. This again is the bauersock project that Whitman described. In this case, they dredged over time in a river. This is the Kansas River, and there's a lot of sediment just naturally flows down the river. That sediment can build up in front of dams or in canals in front of intakes to a powerhouse, and so reducing the area through which water can flow into the turbines. So periodic dredging helps maintain the maximum area for water to flow through. And in this case, as they were dredging, they also, were collecting fish that had been in the canal, including this very large channel catfish. And they rescued that and moved it before they finished draining the canal. On this slide, another type of upgrade is replacing old mechanical controls up in the upper left corner of this slide with newer electronic controls, as in the ones down below on the left. And that allows both for better control overall, but also remote control, as opposed to having someone have to go into the plant and manually flip switches and adjust controls. So it really helps to optimize the generation capacity. At the right, new intake screens, either on a trash rack or on a gate, can also increase or maximize the amount of water that's passing into the turbine at the same time while protecting fish from entering the plant, which is called entrainment. Some environmental improvements, though, do result in less generation. It's not always you get both increased generation and improved environmental conditions. Reducing generation can happen in a whole bunch of ways, but one common one is when a project provides fish passage. A fish passage facility requires water flowing through it for, so the fish can survive, and also to attract them to the fish passage. And so some water that normally would have gone to generation is now diverted around to the fish passage. We do have projects that have voluntarily installed fish passage or voluntarily increased the flows that don't go through the powerhouse, because as a LIHI certified facility, as Shannon was saying, that they can gain revenues from the sale of renewable energy credits that then offsets the loss of revenue from reduced generation. So I think one more slide, please, Whit. This is kind of a funny picture, but it's an example of a turbine runner that's being replaced. In old equipment, the metal in an old runner gets pitted or becomes cavitated over time from small particles of sediment and things that flow through the turbine. That creates friction in the moving water and reduces the efficiency of the turbine. So replacing the runner restores efficiency. Other turbine-related methods can involve installing a new, more modern type of turbine. There's newer technologies I think Shannon might mention in a minute. Or adding a small minimum flow turbine to water that's diverted around the existing powerhouse to take advantage of water that's already being discharged for environmental flows and generating electricity from that as well. So these are some of the ways to retain the value of hydropower, especially at the old facilities across the country, while also supporting broader environmental objectives and meeting our low impact criteria. One thing I did want to mention is about climate change, is adding more challenges for environmental protection and for hydropower owners. For instance, in the West, climate change is resulting in severe droughts, low flows, and with low flows, competing uses for water, whether it's for irrigation or drinking water or hydropower. Conversely, in the Northeast US, they're seeing more frequent large rain events and flooding. So they're two completely different impacts from climate change in different parts of the country that both can have significant impacts on the environment. So hydro owners are working hard to adapt to these changes in water regimes while maintaining their environmental protections. And, we just have to kind of wait and see how this all plays out. But we know our LIHI certified facilities are continuing to, embrace the need for environmental protections at their facilities. And so there are going to be some more trade-offs between generation and environmental protection in the future, I suspect. So with that, I think Shannon will jump back in now.
Thank you, Maryalice. So I wanted to end with one interesting thought. As Maryalice mentioned before, hydropower is old, and many of the facilities that we've certified are over 100 years old. Hydropower generation has basically been around as long as electricity has been. And honestly, even before that, when the power of water was used to turn mills, grist mills, and grind flour, etc. So there's a common misperception that no changes are happening, that hydropower is as efficient and as it will be, and that there's not a lot of innovation happening. So the company that I'd like to talk about a lot is Natel Energy. They are a relatively new company that's looking at two very interesting things. The first, on the right-hand side, you'll see fish-friendly turbines. So this brother-sister team founded this company, and they have invented a turbine that's highly efficient. But when they set out to design it, they also set as a criteria that the turbine would pass as close to 100% safe passage for fish as they possibly could. Their goal was 100% fish passage. And I do believe that with recent data, they're as close as something like 99.8% survival of fish. And that's extraordinary. And so we do have a facility that we certified earlier this year, the Freedom Falls facility in Maine, that's utilizing one of these turbines. And we look forward to tracking them over time and for more of these turbines to be installed. They're also looking at a very interesting thing called restoration hydro. So in this case, they're looking at riverbeds where the water table has actually declined and gone down so far as to dry up riverbeds or close to it. And they're thinking that in situations like this, could they install barriers in the river system? Barriers that are inspired by beavers and beaver dams that don't go from streambed to streambed or shoreline to shoreline, but only go partway through, and provide upstream, downstream fish passage, as well as opportunity for recreational boat passage upstream and downstream of the barriers. Putting those barriers in place, they hope will slow down the water and enable the water table to be restored and increase. And their thought is, if they could install these turbines that they're working on each of the barriers, probably more of a micro hydropower size, so small size, but enough that they're both contributing renewable energy to the grid, but also contributing revenue to the projects to help make them sustainable. And so you get the benefits of hydropower generation or renewable generation on the grid. You also have the benefit of a restored watershed. So we're watching that with interest. They have received multiple awards from the Department of Energy. Currently, LIHI criteria requires that any dam that we certify has been built before August of 1999, which was when we were organized. We never wanted to be an incentive for new dams to be built. So right now, such a project that Natel is working on would not be eligible, but we're watching with great interest, and we'll see how they go and revisit our criteria if we can at that time. Next slide. So I wanted to just leave you with some resources. We do encourage you to visit our website. There are many resources available there, including there's a page on every certified facility and the whole history of applications, reviewer reports, conditions, and statuses. There's a map showing the facilities, our handbook, program details are there, library of published materials and interesting links. Our board members are available there, and our contact information is there. So we encourage you to visit the website, but we also encourage you to reach out to us. We're happy to talk about low impact hydropower anytime to anyone. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ashley.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of you for that wonderful presentation. That was very informative. I definitely learned a lot. And just a reminder to our audience, we're going to do our question and answer portion now. So if you have any questions for our guest speakers, you can put those in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll read them out so we can get some answers. So if you have questions, go ahead and enter those in, and I'll read out the couple that are in there so far. Okay, so there was a question. You had just been talking about fish, so I'll go to that question. How do you determine or test how many fish and other aquatic species go through a power plant?
That is an excellent question. Maryalice is going to tackle the bulk of that. I will just clarify that we do not conduct testing, that we rely on hydropower owners to do that testing. They usually hire consultants who are experts in that area, and they work closely with state and federal agencies to determine how to do the studies, and then in reviewing the studies. But Maryalice knows more about actually conducting the studies.
So there are two basic approaches. One is a desktop approach wherein, based on the facility specifics, the structural specifics, and the specifics of the turbine and how the plant operates, there's computer calculations that can be done to estimate, based on the size of fish and their swimming capabilities, how many could get entrained and end up going through the turbines or not. That's a kind of a rough way of looking at it. Many projects, either when they're getting relicensed by the federal government or under other state requirements, they might have to do actual field testing. And there's a couple ways of doing that, mostly involving tagging fish. So collecting fish, installing these little, tags with GPS ability on them, letting them go through the power plant, capturing them when they've gone through, or tracking them as they go through certain arrays of receivers, and then doing specific, calculations that are very site specific. So, a project might say, we did a test over a month, we allowed fish, put them in the river upstream, waited for them to come downstream, operated the plant like we normally do, and counted the fish that went through different passage routes, whether it's over the spillway, through the fish passage, or through the turbines. And then there's a lot of statistical analysis that goes along with that as well.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that answer. So another question, what is the biggest reason why hydropower facilities would fail a LIHI certification?
So some common reasons are fish passage. It could be that fish passage hasn't been installed but needs to be. And it could be that, it's just too early for us to certify. And we'll encourage somebody to finish that work and come back to us when they are all set. In other situations, there are concerns or at least ambiguity about their impacts on existing fish species or water quality. And honestly, some disagreements about whether the flow at a facility is adequate for the life there. And unless we're clear, we don't certify, or we encourage them to do some more studies to clarify and work with agencies to figure that out. So those are some common reasons.
Okay, thank you for that. And another question, sort of related, can you say a little more how the scale measured in capacity of power production affects the review process? Is the certification process for smaller hydropower projects typically smoother?
Maryalice, you want to take that?
Not necessarily. We have found over the years that the size of the project really has very little bearing on its level of environmental impacts. We have very small projects that we have had to work with them or turn them away until they were able to come back and meet our criteria, whether it's for flows or fish passage or whatever. And then we also have very large projects that are doing a lot of work and have minimized their environmental impacts, regardless of how big they are. And so there isn't we don't look at small projects or big projects any differently from each other. That part of our program is the standardization of our criteria. So every project, no matter how they operate or how big they are or where they are, has to meet the same set of criteria as every other project. So it's very consistent that way, acknowledging at the same time how site-specific and unique every single hydropower project is.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question. I know you maybe answered this one a little bit, talking about that you don't certify newer projects, but with the President's Build Back Better plan and the transition to renewable energy resources, do you predict a rapid increase in the number of facilities applying for LIHI certification in the coming years?
I should clarify that we don't certify facilities on new dams. However, there are 90,000 dams in the United States right now, and 2,500 of them have hydropower on them. So there is significant opportunity to add hydropower to existing dams, and those would be eligible for LIHI certification. And we have certified new facilities that are on existing dams. And the Freedom Falls facility that I mentioned earlier is just such an example. It's a pretty new facility, but on a very old dam. We do hope that the Build Back Better plan does drive some real, not only new installments of hydropower, but certified hydropower. We have seen an uptick in interest, not only by owners, but by renewable energy credit marketers and energy marketers who are looking to make hydropower more attractive. As one can imagine, with a very long history, as hydropower has, and the things that we did not think about at the time when hydropower really became ubiquitous across the country. We didn't think as much about the impacts on the environment. We didn't think very much about the impacts on Indigenous peoples. And, that has made a big impact. And we think that having the LIHI certification gives people confidence, as we said before, about all those impacts. It's an independent entity looking at very clear criteria, and it gives many off-takers, many marketers a sense of clarity on the impact of the hydropower. So we do think, and we hope, that more certifications will come.
Thank you. And just a reminder, any more questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm scrolling through, making sure we got everything. There was a question that you sort of answered because you had a project in Alaska that you showed, but do you operate exclusively in the contiguous United States, or do you operate in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada, anywhere else?
We do look at facilities in the United States. That includes Alaska and Hawaii. We don't have anything certified in Hawaii right now, but all of us would love to do a site visit and applications from Hawaii. We do not certify outside of the United States. One of the key reasons for that is our criteria and our standards are set up for a certain level of information being available. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission licensing process basically ensures that that information is available. We did look into certifying facilities in Canada. Last year, I think we looked into that. And what makes Canada unique, even though it is our neighbor and we actually share electricity grid structure, they have much less of a national regulatory process and a far more provincial one. So Quebec looks at Quebec facilities, Ontario facilities, and there isn't as much consistency across the provinces. In addition to that, a lot of the hydropower is owned by quasi-governmental entities. So in a way, they're kind of regulating themselves. And that posed an issue for us in the way that our handbook is structured. And we would probably need new criteria or new standards in order to support those facilities. But I will say that at the time that we were looking at this, there was no other as robust standard as ours. We are internationally recognized for that. And we routinely get calls from around the world from entities that are looking for us to certify in their countries or to create a program in their countries. And recently, the International Hydropower Association, IHA, supported the release of Hydropower Sustainability Standard, which is a global standard. Their standard is meant to be applicable, really not necessarily in the United States, but around the globe. And we look forward to working with them to get hydropower certified in one way or the other across the globe.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think we have time for just maybe one last question. So let me check through. Again, if you have another question, you would put it in real quick, but I think this will be our last question. And this was on the map that you showed at the beginning that didn't seem to have a lot in sort of the Midwest or the West. Is there a particular reason for that, or do you anticipate that changing in the future?
So of course we hope it changes. I will say that there is, I think we have enough. Okay, so we're going to have a video released somewhat soon. And in that video, there is a nice map that shows the 90,000 dams existing. Sorry, it doesn't show the 90,000, but it shows the 2,500 hydropower facilities in the US and the LIHI certified facilities. There is a high concentration of hydropower in the Northeast and the Northwest. One could imagine why. Those are very wet areas of our country. And so our certified facilities kind of follow that. But also, as I said before, the renewable energy credit markets that recognize and therefore monetize LIHI certification is prominent in the Northeast and the Northwest. And the national programs do generate interest in the other areas of the country. So I would say that as renewable energy credit markets develop, as entities know who we are, we have been a very well-kept secret for a long time, that interest has increased. And we have actually had an application from California. It was our first one, but that is currently on hiatus for a moment while the owner talks with local and state and federal agencies, which is a great outcome of any application process. So we hope that we'll see certifications in more states as time goes on.
Thank you. And that was a great question to end on, because now our audience knows more about your institute and can, spread the word from there. And again, thank you everyone who attended so much. And thank you so much to our guest speakers for being with us today and giving this great presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Again, if anyone has any questions about AccessScience or that they want me to pass on, you can always reach out to the customer success team. That email will be shared with you in the follow-up. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.